So I know it's getting late. It's maybe been a long day for many of you. Tomorrow is going to be the building on conference. So I will do my best to keep you entertained and allow us to get to the point and talking as quickly as possible. Does that sound good? Not while taking a sip of beer, right? So a little bit about me. I am at Samuel Giddins everywhere on the internet. Um, my name is Samuel, and I am the security lead on RubyGems, Bundler, RubyGems.org, all of the associated things that have RubyGems in the name. And I'm super lucky I get to work full time as a security engineer resident at Ruby Central. So, okay, so I didn't say it. Title of the talk: the future of Ruby supply chain security. So, this is what the future of Ruby supply chain security looks like. It looks like me standing there talking about the past year of Ruby security. So, the future looks about the same as the present. This is probably more what we're expecting. We've got gems, we've got supply chains, we've got security. We're talking about like a jewelry vault with $10 million diamonds in it, right? This is a screen cap, I think, from the Ocean's Gate. So, a little disclaimer. Everything I'm going to talk about is subject to change. I make no promises for what I will or will not accomplish in the next year. Because as the security lead, I'm responsible for making this stuff happen. And it's, it's probably more work than just one person who will be able to handle it. So, what is software supply chain security? This is like the buzzword. I was going to say the buzzword of the day, of the year, but we're going on like 5 years now of this being the buzzword in security circles. So, anyone have any guesses what software supply chain security is? Here's a very helpful hint. It's got an acronym. SCS. SSCS. So, guesses. What is software supply chain security?
Like key ownership. The key ownership, because most of the software is like signed by some keys.
So the answer was key ownership, because most software is signed by some keys. That's a small part of it, and the second half of that statement is unfortunately very incorrect, because most software is signed by nothing.
That's why I choose this answer.
Well, thank you for making my job easier. Okay, so let's take a step back here. What is a supply chain? So putting on my economist hat, a supply chain is the series of inputs needed to produce an output. Very, very unhelpful abstract definition. So in software, our software supply chain is just all the different libraries and tools that we use to produce the software. Boiling it down, it's dependencies. You depend on Rails. Rails is a part of your supply chain. You depend on, GitHub Actions to build your Docker containers. That's part of your supply chain. Those are your dependencies. And some bad news is that yours, just like in, the physical world, if you're building something in a factory, your software supply chain is your responsibility. Even if, the stuff in that supply chain comes from someone else. So, I have some bad news, which is you need to care about your software supply chain even if you don't want to, raise your hand if you want to care about something called software supply chain security. Let the record show there are maybe a dozen people lying because they raised their hands. You don't want to care about this. I'm paid to care about it, and I barely want to. But more bad news is, important people like governments care about where software comes from and how it's produced. For example, the US government says C is bad. And statements like that obviously come in much, much longer, like 60-page PDFs with a lot of very bureaucratic verbiage. But that stuff matters because it impacts, the software procurement process across that entire country's government. And believe it or not, governments use things like open source software. They use computers, they use SaaSes, they use services, and they care where that stuff comes from and how it's built now. And you might be thinking, well, Sam, you American, thinking that everyone here cares what the US government says. Guess what? I have more bad news for you, which is the EU also says this stuff matters. In fact, there's the EU Cyber Resilience Act, called the CRA. There's a great write-up about it on the OpenSSF blog entitled, "Does the EU CRA affect my business?" I will give you, not even one full guess what the answer is.
Yeah.
Yes! Wow, so smart. Yes, it does. Basically, governments are saying, hey, you're liable for what your software does. If your customer's data gets accessed by someone, that's your fault. If you built some software and it has a critical vulnerability, and maybe you're using it in a car or people's health care, their health records, their bank, their money, all that stuff, it's your responsibility to basically follow this set of guidelines about how you're supposed to build software. So I will assume that I've convinced you to care about software supply chain security, and if I haven't, please keep that to yourself. So what have we done at Ruby Gems recently to make the software supply chain more secure? Well, first off, I say we, it's the royal we, I mean me. We shipped a feature called Trusted Publishing that allows you to automate releases of gems from right now GitHub Actions, soon to be GitLab and BuildKite. So you can, instead of saying, well, it would be nice to automate gem releases, but I have to use my two-factor auth code, and so I can't really automate that. I guess I'm going to keep running that from my laptop. You can stop doing that now. You can attest that your software comes from the place you say it comes from. The example I like to give from this is, so I presume there's at least someone here who runs things on AWS and uses all the various AWS services and the AWS gems. Right now, how do you know if you're from AWS? You look and you're like, does the gem name start with AWS dash? It does. Okay, that's probably good. That's got to be official, right? With signed attestations of provenance, there's cryptographically verifiable ways to say, hey, this software came from the repository that I think it should be coming from. We ran a full audit of rubygems.org, both a third-party audit, so I'm not just patting myself on the back, both of the code base and our infrastructure, we've got a security team, including Mache, who respond when people publish spam or malicious gems. And we've also started building research tools, aka the things that I work on when I don't feel like doing my actual work that I've settled. So that all is in the past. What will we do? Again, this is all the subject to change, might not happen stuff. As I was actually just talking about with Mache, we're going to work on allowing you to write policies over, SIG-store attestation, so you can say, hey, I expect Rails to come from the Rails/Rails repo. I expect all of my active and action something gems to come from that repo. I expect any gem that matches the name AWS dash something to come from AWS. And so, the actual hard part is making a nice user interface over all that. I've been working on it, I promise. That will hopefully ship and allow you to be more confident that, hey, the dependencies that you've been using when you go and update them and so on, they're still coming from the same place. Another fun project I've started working on with some folks is something called binary transparency. So right now, you just probably assume that when you download a gem, like foo-1.0.0.gem, that it's the same foo-1.0.0 gem that your colleague's getting, or that you got last month. You might say, hey, I know that rubygems.org has an API that'll tell me what the checksum of the gem should be. I verified that. But we don't want you to have to sort of trust us. We don't want you to need to access rubygems.org to be able to verify that. Binary transparency is a way of us putting in an immutable append-only log. Yes, I guess you could call it a blockchain. Please don't. Every file that gets pushed through rubygems.org. And that'll be something that you can verify offline. I can give you a gem and the hash of it, and you can verify, like, yeah, you gave me the right thing. Less technically, but probably just as important, this year we're working on policies for rubygems.org. I don't know if you noticed, but you didn't click I agreed to link to very long terms of service that you absolutely read in full. We don't make users agree to anything. We don't tell you what we do with your data and stuff like that. Kind of, that was like standard in 2009, a little bit sketchy in 2025. So we're working on that stuff this year. Things like a privacy policy, so we make promises about where your data goes. Terms of use, things like defining what malicious use of the service looks like. More concretely, a big thing we need to work on is what the policy is for yanking gems. There have been a couple of occasions in our community's history where things have been yanked. There have been more than a couple of occasions in other people's communities, JavaScript, where things have broken horrifically because someone takes down their package in anger, and that's, believe it or not, bad for security, because you might be like, well, I can't download rack anymore for whatever reason, just as a hypothetical. I can't download rack anymore, so I'm gonna just scour the internet and try and find a random version of rack, or I'm going to suddenly start depending on someone's like rack-replacement gem and hope that it's the same thing. Or I wonder why I can't successfully deploy my software anymore. Oh, right, the gem that we used is gone, so guess we can't ever push a new release or roll back or something. And associated with that, allowing, when do we allow people to take over a gem name? What sort of transparency is involved with that? What exactly letter signed by someone else's lawyer needs to be sent to us before we'll do it? Um, that all, I swear on my laptop, I have a browser window open with like 10 Google Docs. Each one of them is a different policy thing, and I've been procrastinating reviewing them. So we're also working on securing the infrastructure that serves all the gems, because scarily enough, the Ruby supply chain basically runs through RubyGems.org. Everyone is running code from gems. RubyGems.org has access to, the CDN, the S3 bucket, the Rails app that has the accounts, the Rails app that tells you like the authoritative versions and checksums of gems. So we're working on locking down that infrastructure so we can be more confident that like you can't take over the Ruby community by hitting me with a hammer until I give you the credentials. There's a great XKCD about that, about how encryption, like fancy encryption, is great and all, but a bad guy with the hammers can get through anything. It's funnier when you see that coming. So this is my big project for the year. Basically improving the setup with binary gems or gems with precompiled extensions. So this is all based on the trusted publishing and SIG-Store work, so we can say like, hey, this random code that I'm running is from a trusted source. The goal is to be able to stop running arbitrary code whenever you install a gem, because that stuff is actually kind of a lot harder to review. Like, when was the last time you reviewed someone's CMake configuration for a gem that you're using? Do you even know how to review a CMake configuration? I think I'm a pretty good engineer. I can't even look at that and figure out what's going on. Additionally, one of the things that we want to have happen is to distribute the trust that everyone has in the ecosystem. If I'm going to pick on Gary, even though Mike's done a great job and ships precompiled platform gems now, but back in the day, it was a running joke amongst everyone who used Ruby how often Gary would fail to compile. Well, you remember those days, right? So, how would you know that the binary that got built when you ran gem install Gary or bundle install would be the same binary that I'm going to pick on you again, that Mache gets, and that Mache is looking at to see if it has anything malicious in it? Let the record show he's laughing and nodding. So what we want to have happen is what's happened in the Python community. You ship precompiled gems, and then if something is found, okay, we'll deal with it all together. And I actually put out a blog post on the Ruby Gems blog recently about what happens when malicious dependencies get released. And if not, you can feel pretty confident that other smarter people than you, people who are more concerned about security, know what to look for, have audited the gem that you're using. because it's the same exact binary that they're looking at and you're running. And to make all of this work, we need to be able to tie the source code that people are reviewing together with those binary artifacts. So I plan on working on making gem builds as reproducible as possible by default and as easy to reproduce as possible. So you can check out, and I say you, I mean Mache, can check out a gem source from GitHub, run gem build, and verify that what you expect to get out of this, the source code is the artifact that you're downloading when you run gem install. And a lot of this really comes down to improving developer experience. I'm a big believer that making good tools that are like pleasant to use, that you don't actively want to avoid using, is one of the most important things in our tool bag as security engineers. Right? Like if I can give you a tool and I say, hey, this does the gems for you, and it's fast and easy to use and has pretty emojis in its terminal output, you're going to use it because it's the least amount of friction. And if I build in all the security features to it, you're going to be using all the security features that I get paid to make you all use. What this comes down to is building security into the ecosystem holistically, so that every part of the Ruby Gems ecosystem does all the security stuff that we're quote unquote supposed to be doing. I can see that I'm losing you, so I have
Not me.
I have some more bad news, which is you also have a role to play in this. As much as I like to, try and do everything I can for Ruby Gems security, you all are like the developers who are using gems and making apps with Ruby and pushing gems and stuff. And there's things that you can do to help secure the Ruby supply chain. Do things like adopt trusted publishing for your gems. Build your gems with pre-compiled extensions in CI so people can see what the build process looks like. But don't release software from your laptop where God knows what files you put there. Make sure your gem builds are reproducible. More applicably, you can do things like update your software. Use the Ruby Gems and bundlers that have all the latest and greatest security features. We can support our work at Ruby Central, obligatory, pitch for my employer. You can go and look at your dependencies. When was the last time you looked at every single dependency that your Rails monolith has? Do you know how many dependencies your big Rails app has? Seriously, does anyone know how many gems they install?
Too much.
No, yes, too much, but that's not a number. If you don't know the number, I guarantee you don't know what's in
I know
each
the
one of
name
those
of
gems.
Gem by lot.
Yeah, but have you actually looked at every gem in your gem file.log?
No.
Okay. Maybe look, just once. And I'm going to, again, you're already doing these things, right? If you work in any sort of regulated industry or sell software to someone in any regulated industry, they actually require these things. I can speak best to regulations in the US because that's where I live and work. I know that if you touch anything involving money, your code has to go through code review before it gets shipped. Stuff like that. And this all starts with actually like taking a look at what your compliance and legal needs are. What does your your like terms of service for your website say you're doing? What do your contracts with your clients say you're doing? What are you promising? What are your legal responsibilities here in the EU around people's private data? What are you going to have to do for the CRA when that comes into full effect? I'm not asking you to like answer these questions in their entirety. These are like core business questions that hopefully you can bring up to the business people. You can also help the authors of the gems that you use understand why we're asking them to make these changes. I know it's easy to say, we've had gems for over 20 years now. So why does anything have to change? It's been working. But the landscape has changed, and the set of expectations around the software that we build has changed. And finally, it's really tempting, I know, to think about security as an inconvenience. It's a roadblock. It's more work that you have to do that you don't want to do. It's kind of like writing tests. But it's also part of your product. Keeping your users' data secure, adhering to your contracts, following the law wherever your business operates. Increasingly, security is just a part of that. So, as I said, keep this short. If we have any hopefully very sarcastic questions, I'm happy to answer a couple, and then we can just hang out. How does that sound? I will just stand here awkwardly if no one has questions. Making me walk, just late at night.
Thank you for your job, especially. Do you have any anecdote of recently maybe any gem that was published in Ruby or in RubyGems.org that was meant to do something malicious?
I think the most common class of things it's twofold. One is people guess or discover like an unpublished gem name that you use, like inside your company or whatever, and then they push a gem that has that name to rubygems.org, hoping you'll download and install it. And on install or on require, what it will do is take all of your environment variables, all of their values, and send them up somewhere. That is by far the most common thing, and it is one of the reasons why getting RubyGems out of the business of running code at install time is something I'm very, very interested in doing. One standing here, so.
Regarding gems and native extensions, how do you check and verify underlying library? Everybody knows about this XZ attempt. Yeah. How do you do it?
Well, there's another acronym that's become very popular. Who here has heard of SBOMs? You don't count, Mache.
I know.
Okay, one person. SBOMs stand for Software Bill of Materials, and it's basically the idea that software contains software in it, so we should list all the software that's in your software. Um, Basically, the idea being if you ship a gem that has a library or it's precompiled or depends on a C library or ship something that isn't in a gem, part of a gem, you list what's in it. And there are standardized formats for doing this, and there's tools for analyzing all this, and no one in the Ruby ecosystem has adopted it. And you know what? That sounds like a project I should work on next year. So the answer right now is we don't have a good answer for that. But we know we don't have a good answer for that.
First and foremost, thank you for the work you're doing. I would like to ask about how do you envision the protection against the yanking? If you can share.
Yeah, so the solution that I would like to implement is twofold. I can't promise that this is what we'll actually do, but I think the right solution is basically half what we have now. So last year we implemented a change where you can't yank a gem after it has more than, I think, 100,000 downloads, or if it's been out for more than 30 days. The idea being if there's something bad in it, like people have got it downloaded already, so yanking it doesn't really protect anyone, and it's just a nuisance. The other half of it is right now, when you yank a gem, it quote unquote disappears completely. It's in a version S3 bucket, like the records there. We have all that information, but that means anyone depending on it is out of luck. So we're going to probably copy what PyPI has done, where you can yank something, but that just means no one will install it from scratch. But if it's already in a lock file or something, you'll get a warning saying, hey, you're using a yank dependency. Maybe don't do that, but also don't break the build when that happens.
Is it achieved by that you allow? I mean, let's say I'm a maintainer of a rack and I yank it, and all the other people in the audience, without the protecting mechanism, would, as you said, be out of luck. And when you implement that protection so that they can use rack and not have their application broken, you essentially fork it behind the scenes as a thin wrapper over my.
No, so what we would do is, like, when you yank your gem, we don't, like, we keep it in a versioned S3 bucket. You should assume anytime anything is pushed to rubygems.org that it is public and someone, Manche, has downloaded it. Like, there are people who mirror rubygems.org. There are gems that literally no one uses, and you can tell they still have a few hundred downloads on their rubygems.org pages. So, like, a gem that's been published is out there forever. Assume that whatever's in it, someone has access to, or take your credentials, etc., if you need something. What we probably do is, instead of deleting all record of its existence from the index files that we serve, we'll just say, hey, this version exists and it is yanked as a piece of metadata. And so nothing will pull it, from scratch unless you're pointing exactly to, like, if you're pinned to it, you can continue downloading it. We'll stop making, like, the download of the .gem 404, but it won't, like, be resolved for anyone running bundle install without lock file or running an install or something.
two things. One question regarding the releasing process. So is there any automated like a sandbox environment when you deploy a gem? It runs in the sandbox, so it gets scenes called what API calls are during the install process or something like. Or what's the binary doing?
So we don't have any instrumentation running as a blocking part of that. Like when you run gem push, we don't do any analysis on what's in the gem. There are people who have set up automated analysis to run ghost stock, Mache. And I mean I have similar stuff running. Even if we could, we wouldn't want to put something like that as a blocker in the release pipeline. It takes too long, and it's very difficult to safely both like have something sandboxed and be able to get results out of that sandbox, which is what we need to really evaluate what's going on. And so that's the reason why we're most interested in making sure that nothing happens at install time, so it becomes easier to audit, like what is it doing. So many questions.
Not security related, but I was wondering if you had an update on the Ruby Gems UI that's in beta right now.
So yeah, our designer has done mockups for most of like modern looking UI that doesn't look like it's from 2013. We started rolling that out as part of our work on organizations. Unfortunately, the grant that was funding that work ran out, so it's sort of we have most of the designs, but we don't have engineering resources or design resources to finish. Yeah, if someone would like to sponsor like the RubyGems.org redesign, we would love that. Or if someone would, like to work on that, we would love that. And, yeah, it's just unfortunately most of the resources we have right now are dedicated to security because that's where the money's been. So it's just hard to like push a huge project that isn't in some way related to security stuff over the finish line. Okay. This is my last time walking across the room.
Hello, thank you very much. I was wanted to ask about the reversible builds. You mentioned a lot about them, but I would like to summarize what the current status is, and if there are any ideas about actually doing this also for the libraries that see extensions and stuff like this.
Yeah, so right now we are able to do reproducible builds of like plain Ruby, no extensions, gems. At this point, like 6 or 7 years ago, we added support for the source state epic standard, which is an environment variable that you can set that basically says, hey, consider as if we're running at this point in time. This is important because tar balls have timestamps in them. Horrible decision. I hate that is the state of the world, but that was the number one cause of gem build unreproducibility. There's also the fact that your gem spec gets serialized into YAML and put into the gem, which means that in addition to knowing what time a gem was built, you also need to know what version of Ruby Gems it was built with, and also what version of libyaml. So you can figure out what the timestamp is by looking at the gem. You can figure out the version of Ruby gems by looking at the gem spec in the gem, and you're out of luck on libyaml stuff. So there's been some sources of non-reproducibility there. All that to say, right now you can only sort of do reproducible builds of the simplest gems, and what really needs to happen is the easiest way to figure out like why is something not reproducible is to try and reproduce it and diff it, and it is on my to-do list to sort of do that at scale. You know, trying to like check out Git repos, figure out the versions, figure out what the different parameters are that are like needed to reproduce the build, and then putting that all into the gem spec so it is easier to automate, and we can then have, you know, once reproducible builds are the standard, you can have someone in the community who is doing rebuilds and verifying that no, this actually is based on the source repository. And we care about that because where do we go to look at code? Like, do we unpack the gems that we're using? No. If you want to review the code, you go on GitHub and look at the source code on GitHub. So reproducible builds make it so that when you look at the source code on GitHub, you can trust that it's also the same source code that you're running in the gem.
Let me free you from questions.
Thank you so much. If anyone can finally here, right? And